Two guys in and two guys out. The O-line picture is getting pretty clear. Welcome to another live edition of the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to my hashtag everydayers, those of you that come in and listen to the show every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com to learn more. Today on the show, it's going to be a big time O-line one. We are live again, so I hope you guys have been able to come hang out. We've had to do several of these live shows, but the headlines have just piled up. I wanted to get them out of the way just in case something big happens that I can come do tonight or tomorrow morning. So let's get into it. The official news is that Ingram has been traded for a 2026 6th-round pick to the Houston Texans. The Vikings will incur like $300,000 in dead cap or something that's left on his rookie deal, but otherwise the rest of the money goes away, so the Vikings save a little bit. Ingram as like a cap casualty was an idea, and that's basically a cap casualty, but you get something for it, which I'm actually kind of surprised they got something for Ingram. I think like a 2nd-round pick that's like gonna get cut. And it's very clear because they signed Will Fries that he's going to get cut. Usually you don't get a lot for that. Also, Garrett Bradbury is they're trying to trade him right now, but they're probably going to release him soon. That was also reported by Ian Rappaport. And the Vikings got a new swing tackle in Justin. Is it School or Skrull? It's School, right? Justin School. He comes from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We will talk about him. But really, by the way, if you're watching live, I'm going to be riding the lights the whole time. My window faces south, and it is a partly cloudy day, so we are going up and down. The sky is not being kind to my attempt to make a show that looks pretty good. This is what you all have been begging for, right? Like, this is the O-line overhaul that we're looking at, and I think this is about what it is. I think we now have seen that this is the line we have. It's going to be Darisaw with maybe Justin School as the Justin School, not Skrull. That's the bad guys in the Captain Marvel movie. Justin School will maybe be the kind of spot starter, swing starter. He's got a little bit of experience. We'll talk about him a little later. But Darisaw, when he comes back, I think Blake Brandel looks like he pretty much gets the job now. Like, nobody else is under contract to compete with him at all. And then Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, and Brian O'Neill. There's your line. Like, that seems like it's going to be the thing. And that doesn't mean that they're like not going to draft anybody. Like, they might, sure. But they are like that. They don't have to. That's, I guess, the way to put it. So here's what I'm going to do for today. I'm going to rely a lot on the chat. Let's have a little discussion about this stuff, because there's a lot of different angles here. And actually, Dylan Ruckty in the chat asks, why get rid of Ed? I don't agree with moving depth. I don't think that he was depth. I think that they might have seen him as somebody that like maybe gets cut in camp, right? Like, I don't know if that's depth that they're going to have. And I think that does mean that eventually there will be a new guy coming in, either another free agent, but like a smaller time one, like a Dan Feeney kind of move, or drafting somebody, right? So still very much a 1st-round pick. And with all of these guys, like, okay, Ryan Kelly is like 31, right? The 2 D tackles that are over 30. False Prophet says philosophy change, they'll run some duo now. Remind me to come back to that, because the duo is not exactly a thing of the past here. That is not exactly a thing that they have avoided. But you got these guys that are like over 30, and you have a succession plan. Right? Like, that's what you're looking for now, and it's so much easier to find a succession plan for an established player than it is to find somebody who than it is to like need a guy with a sense of urgency. When you have 3 years span to find a guy, you can look at the college class, you can look at the landscape and say, let's try to get a guard in 2027, and we know that or let's try to get a center in 2027, and we just need Ryan Kelly to be okay for 2 years. And it's like so much easier to do that than to be like, oh my God, we don't have any corners, we need somebody now, and we need to draft 3 people, and oh my God, that's what gets you, Andrew Booth picks. And like famously, that's what gets you the Laquan Treadwell pick. Right? They didn't have anybody. Like they had no people, and they had to pick a wide receiver. They had to pick the next guy on, and they ended up kind of reaching for a guy that they shouldn't have reached for. Go Wolves says we need a good young running back. Yeah, sure. That's another sort of idea there where like Aaron Jones now is the guy for 2 years. So if you don't get a running back now, it's okay. And you can leverage that and say, okay, if we don't get a running back right now, that means we don't have to accept a situation that we are unhappy with. And that is so important to team building. It's like sort of goes into the anti-tanking thing that I talk about all the time. If you don't have that position filled, it's so much harder to fill it than if you have a guy and you're just trying to improve on that guy. And like even like negotiating with Will Fries, you can negotiate against having Ed Ingram on the team, even though you're going to get rid of him if you sign this guy. You can kind of say, well, hey, man, if you don't take this, we're going to roll with Ed Ingram, and we're okay with that, and this is actually seriously our final offer. That kind of leverage helps. It really does. Versus just having nobody and being like, yeah, no, we know, you know, and I know that we're desperate to get you, and then suddenly they get the leverage there. Okay, so false prophet, they ran tons of duo. I don't know where this idea that they didn't run duo. They ran tons of duo. Duo was awesome last year. I talked about it a ton on this show. How cool duo was, how good they were at duo. I think they ran a little less of it when they switched to Dalton Reisner, and I think specifically because they switched to Dalton Reisner, he's not as good at that. But like if you wanted duo, boy, did you get it, especially early in the year. And it's fresh in my mind now because I was just watching Jonathan Hargrave, who I did want to talk about a little today. I was watching Jonathan Hargrave, and he only played 3 games. So, and one of those games was the one against the Vikings. And my God, the duo reps in that game took that dude to the woodshed. That was not his best game. And I'm like remembering now, like, oh my God, the O-line cooked in that game. There's one other thing I want to mention on Ed Ingram, and look, a little bit of a black mark on the reputation of the Vikings. Not necessarily the fact that they like acquired a guy with previous allegations. Every team does that from time to time. It's the NFL, and the reality is these guys don't care as much as you do. It's much more about the business and the profitability and all that stuff. Oh my goodness, I did not see that was a wake up from a nap alarm. Live show, baby. So, but what I'm trying to get at is the way that they handled it deeply disappointed me back in 2022 when they were asked, hey, this guy has some, sordid allegations in his past. Unsavory behavior is a way I've ever heard it put that I think is tactful. And they didn't deny it. They just kind of hoped people stopped asking. And I didn't like that. And so I kind of made a point to mention it, not make a big deal out of it, but mention it to make sure that they couldn't get away with that they couldn't get away from what that was. And trying to balance that with also, hey, I wanted to talk about, Ed Ingram as a player. And I'm going to toot my own horn. I think that the Locked On Vikings podcast or patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL was the only place where you could get information like Ed Ingram overextends his outside arm and that leads to losses. Nobody else was talking about that. So I think I did do that, but I'm glad that now I can just evaluate the guard the Vikings have without having to be like, oh yeah, and by the way, here's my article on the other thing that you probably maybe are asking about. It's nice. My emotions about Garrett Bradbury are completely different. And I actually am sad to see him go, even though I fully believe, just like everybody else does, that the Vikings have improved at center here and that their situation at center is better than it was before, for sure. That doesn't mean I'm not a little sad, and longtime everydayers know why. So we'll talk about that and Justin School and maybe a little bit of Jonathan Hargrave talk next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. If you're trying to get your gamble on for the college hoops tournament, FanDuel is the place to do it. If your bracket is completely screwed, boy, That's the way to keep things interesting. if you got nothing else to watch for, go ahead and check out FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 for a $5 bet, assuming it wins. That's 40-1 odds on whatever bet you want. You can pick a 1 to beat a 16, pick a 2 to beat a 15. Pick the UConn women's team to win a game. That's going to happen every time. They're insane. Paige Beckers. Whatever it is, put $5 down, and if you win, you get $200 in bonus bets to use on anything from Cinderella stories, parlays, whatever you want. It's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is super simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Moving on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for coming in, listening live to Locked On Vikings while we talk about the end of an era for the Vikings O-line. And really the end of that era is Garrett Bradbury and this wide zone thing, this grim reacher kind of move that they did, this idea of this, hey, well, we've got an undersized center, but he's fast. Ryan Kelly is a much more prototypical center, a little slower, a little bigger. And when he came in, it was very clear that Bradbury was going to be on the outs, right? But now it's like been directly reported that Bradbury is on the outs. They're going to try to trade him, and if they can't, they're going to release him. It's always a bummer when that report comes out because it totally torpedoes your leverage to trade him at all. But I think much like Ed Ingram, like the second Ryan Kelly hits the team, you go, yeah, man, that's kind of the end of it for this guy. Boy, audio listeners, you are listening. You are missing just an absolute fight for my life against the lighting in this room. But here's the thing. My deal is I'm going to miss Garrett Bradbury because of the bit. Bradbury was better than he ever got credit for. And that's not necessarily to say that he was an above average center. I think he was maybe an average center. But he was always seen as the worst dude in the league. And it always bugged me to see the same thing happen to every single other. I saw Jason freaking Kelsey get walked back by nose tackles one-on-one because he's got, a 35-pound disadvantage. But only Vikings fans seem to only notice it when it happened to Bradbury because Vikings fans were so tuned into it. And I firmly blame PFF for that. And the sort of the instinct that we have. And I think, like, for me, look, I started this show in December of 2018. It was like week 16 when I did my first Locked On Vikings show. So my first draft pick that I covered as host of Locked On Vikings was Garrett Bradbury. And so I have spent the entirety, all the growth that I have personally, like that I have done through this show, not growth like numbers wise, but like me growing as a host and analyst and an adult, has sort of coincided with a lot of time talking about Garrett Bradbury in off seasons. Should they draft Tyler Lindenbaum? Should they go pick up, Andrew Norwell and move him to center? Like, should they do this or that? Should Austin Schlottman get in, or Mason Cole, or who's going to be the next guy? And sort of parrying away all of those things. And none of them happened. Not one thing happened. Bradbury got COVID. He sat out for like 2 extra weeks after that. That was the closest he got to being benched, and it didn't last. And for me, that was right around the time when I realized that I had that look up the answers in the back of the book thing that a place like PFF really facilitates. And this has been my PFF thing for a long time. Not necessarily that their grades are stupid and wrong, but rather that I don't want to use them because that's the back of the book. And you never learn math by looking up the answers in the back of the textbook. You can get the answers. You can go be lazy and be done, but you never get you never learn math that way. And in my quest to be able to more self-sufficiently get an answer, I learned so much about what Garrett Bradbury specifically did. Like, he was the object of that so many times, that I'm really happy that I was able to kind of do that. And it gave me a resentment for people, for not for people, but for the logic that was, he had bad grades his first 2 years and people made up their minds and never moved on. But Bradbury's story as a Viking was, he was asked to do a lot more in the Zimmer Kubiak offenses that he played for. He played for the Gary Kubiak, Kevin Stefanski offense, then the Gary Kubiak offense, then the Clint Kubiak offense. And those were the three Zimmer offenses that he played for. All the same thing, all asking him to frequently reach like two eyes. That is a long reach, and not a lot of centers are ever asked to do that. He would lose those, and because of the fronts that would invite, because he could reach that hard, and that gives the Vikings like a run advantage, they very frequently asked him, or like the fronts that they would get would kind of try to take away that advantage, and you get a lot more like odd front stuff. You'd get people lining up dead on him, not necessarily because they liked that pass rush matchup, and they did, and that was a problem, and that's why I say he's average, and not that he was actually like a really good center or whatever, but it takes away it means somebody else is reaching that guy now. The guard is, whoever that, Tom Compton, Dakota Dozier, Ed Ingram, Blake Brandel is now doing the reach block, right? And with Kevin O'Connell, they stopped asking him to do that. It was more mid-zone. It was more normal, and you would get more normal fronts. And then suddenly, by not asking as much of Garrett Bradbury, by making his job easier, suddenly the grades went up and the production went up and everything like that. And that was like a big inflection point for me, where I was like, oh, they just don't have a degree of difficulty measure. And I've spoken with people at PFF who have confirmed this to me. They have degree of difficulty for like large buckets. So like they will downweight, a play action pass blocking rep, because that's easier than a straight drop back, or like a screen is like a different category for them. But when it comes to like whether you were up against, like if you're the right guard and it's a 4-3 over or an under, like whether you're on the strong side or the weak side of that front is a totally different job. And depending on what it is, it can be way harder or easier, just depending on the angles. And they just don't adjust for that. And it's, oh, okay, so that's just going to add like a ton of noise to this. And you're just going to never have like every play is going to have such a big margin for error that your like confidence band is going to be, a third of the graph. Yeah, false prophets as an issue is that he just looks really small, and it makes it stick out more when he gets walked back. Yeah, maybe I get it. Like, I don't know. I come on here and talk about football, and I look like Neil Patrick Harris. Like, I think I hear about that sometimes. You know what I mean? But this is just me complaining about the whole thing and just reflecting on 7 years of covering this guy. But the actual information isn't really out yet as of this recording. He's out. He's going to be released or traded. If he's traded, it's going to be, a 6-7 swap in 2027. They're not going to get much draft capital for him. Whenever Ian Rappaport comes out and says, hey, he's going to be released if they can't work out a trade, all you're ever going to get for him is exclusive negotiating rights. And I don't know, for the guy that the Vikings just signed a 31-year-old center to replace, I don't know if anybody's going to be that excited to give him that. He has a very palatable contract. That's the one thing I will say, is that if you do trade for Garrett Bradbury, you do have a pretty cheap year on him. You're getting him for like $4.5 million. Like, you can get a really cheap year. That's probably good value for someone. Like, I do think that could be, or they all say, meh, we'll just let him hit the market and we'll negotiate our own thing with him. So yeah, I don't think I don't think they're going to get much, but it's okay. If they get anything, that'll be nice. It won't affect the compensatory formula or anything like that, by the way. A couple other things that I want to mention. Allmark Trouble asks, not a Cup being signed along. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about Cooper Kupp getting signed. Go Wolves is asking about the backup QB stuff. So there's a whole bunch I want to get into, as well as a new swing tackle thing. So that will all be next on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Monarch Money is known as a budgeting app, but it's so much more than a budgeting app. It's the kind of thing that can help you. Like, look, if you are like I was talking to Matt yesterday on the show, where did all the money go? Oh my God, suddenly it has all disappeared. Maybe a budgeting app kind of thing is right for you. But Monarch Money, it's more like your personal CFO. You can track accounts, investments, and spending. And do more than just manage your money and just track, am I spending too much? You can really build wealth. Managing money with a partner as well is smoother than ever. If you have shared accounts, you can set goals, and you can all stay on the same page without stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Don't juggle multiple apps and all kinds of budget solutions and all this stuff going on. You can use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com and get 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. All right, so let's rapid fire a few of these topics. So Justin School, I don't know a lot about him. He's a swing tackle type. This dude was drafted right around Oli Udoh, like 6th round 2019. So kind of that tier of guy. He ends up actually getting in for the 2019 49ers. He actually played in the Super Bowl that year. And then a couple years later, he tore his ACL that facilitated his exit from San Francisco. That was kind of it for him. It was just bad timing. And then he ended up playing for Tampa Bay for the rest of the time. He ended up playing a few years there, but again, is like a backup, the depth of swing tackle. We've sort of been talking about this as like a low-key need for the Vikings all the way like leading up to free agency. Is the David Quessenberry replacement, but a more serious guy. Because Christian Darrisaw's injury timeline is just a little bit spooky. So he got the same injury as TJ Hawkinson, the ACL with the MCL. So the timeline is ostensibly going to be similar. It'll be like somewhere between like 8 to 10 months or something like that. They are optimistic as of reports that he'll be ready at some point in camp, but they're optimistic, not sure. It's like, it's looking okay for that. So you got to be ready for week 1 if you lose it, right? So the Vikings have to get somebody. If he's not ready for week 1, if Darrisaw's not ready for week 1, the Vikings have to have somebody that's got a little bit of playing experience. Justin School appears to be that guy. They also got Leroy Watson the other day. He's like been on practice squads. I don't think he's quite that tier of guy. I think that's going to be more of your third team preseason dude. That's the second guy that gets announced on cut day. But I could be wrong, right? Like preseason will determine all of this stuff, but that seems to be your sort of backup swing tackle replacement. And then, he'll compete with like Walter Rouse for that job. And there's your OT3 and OT4. So there's a couple other things that are worth mentioning. The backup QB situation. So obviously like the whole NFL has ground to a halt waiting for Aaron Rodgers to stop being annoying. It seems like he's picking between the Giants and Steelers. Some reporters are trying to make the Vikings a thing, but like Rap Sheet, Schefter, and the entire local beat has all been like, yeah, no, the Vikings aren't in on that. So that's causing a lot of teams and a lot of other transactions to kind of hold up as like, 3 teams wait for Aaron Rodgers to do their thing. And then those teams are also, and then like other players that those teams are into are waiting. And then other teams that are interested in those players are waiting for that and it all just like spider webs out. Sloth asks, does size of an athlete correlate to recovery time for that injury? Probably affects things, but not to the degree where it would change the number of months, you would say. But sure, yeah, like that's definitely going to be like a different process, but not significantly so, I don't think. Don't quote me on that though, I'm no doctor. Can that PA in Barrerio to make the Aaron Rodgers chatter stop? Look, man, I mean, like the lead reporter at The Athletic is saying it. Like it's a story. I begged for it not to be earlier this year, but we can't always get what we want. But we went on the Minnesota football party this morning and we're like, oh my God, the dwindling backup QB market. There are still plenty of players, but none of these players compete to start, in my opinion. Which tells you where the Vikings are at with JJ McCarthy, right? If it's not Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, like, listen, there's plenty of names, like some people in the chat are saying Jameis Winston, if you want to do that, Drew Lock, Joe Flacco, if you want to do old man hoops. You could bring back an old friend like Case Keenum or even Teddy Bridgewater. They're on the market. Somebody like CJ Beathard, who has experience in this system. Cooper Rush, Carson Wentz is a name I've seen floated around. On another old friend in Taylor Heineke at the ripe old age of 32. What a career he's made for himself out of Old Dominion after like losing a job to like Mitch Leidner or whatever the hell happened that one year. No, it wasn't. He lost a job to Sean Mannion, I think. Was that it? I don't know. Somebody check me on that. But so like, if you want a backup QB, the names are abundant. There are like 6 or 7 guys that would all be perfectly fine as a backup QB. But if you want a true blue, like Drew Lock doesn't push a starter. He's a backup QB. He's not going to come in and like take the job, right? Joe Flacco, nobody's going into a whole season with Joe Flacco on purpose, but he'd make a great backup. So to me, the Vikings have lost their opportunity. When they lost out on Daniel Jones, I think they lost out on their opportunity to have a true camp competition for JJ McCarthy. And the fact that they let it happen and they weren't more motivated to really get Daniel Jones in the building, and maybe even the fact that Daniel Jones made the choice to go to the Colts because he felt that was a more real competition than it would have been in Minnesota, I think it tells you where they're at. And by the way, you don't need to read the tea leaves in Nancy Drew it. Ian Rappaport has gone on TV for the last 2 days and been like, yeah, no, JJ McCarthy is the guy. That's their team. And now the focus is on building the best possible team around them. And in the cap stuff we talked about with Matt Freese yesterday, the fact that they have taken so much money from 2026, which is what I wanted them to do. So I love that they have done this, because what it means is, why wait to use the assets at your disposal? Use money from 2026 so that you can get more guys in the building now. Sign them all to 3-year deals. They'll be in the building in 2026. You're not going to be hamstrung in 2026. You're just using those assets ahead of time and getting you're making 2026 transactions that will also affect the 2025 season. And you have the luxury of doing so because cap go up. And because you've got a quarterback on the rookie contract, right? So do it and build the best window possible. I said this yesterday, I'm going to say it again. The window is now. Welcome to the Super Bowl window with JJ McCarthy, your rookie contract Super Bowl window. If JJ McCarthy is capable of being a Super Bowl quarterback and you draft him 10th overall, that's the hope. Here we are. Welcome to time to prove it. It is there. And the Vikings have just gone full hog in on that. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's exactly what you do. No half measures. But Brett Rippon is the only other quarterback under contract, so you need one of those guys. One other thing that you guys wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah, Cooper Kupp. If Cooper Kupp signs while Luke is live, I'm naming my firstborn Locked On Vikings. Man, I was low-key hoping that Kupp would sign somewhere. It might happen. So if something like that happens, later tonight or overnight or early in the morning, I will go live and talk about it because I think that's a big deal. But the problem is there are a ton of teams in on him. So I think the reporters know everything that can be known right now and have said it. Lots of teams are in on it. I've heard Patriots. I think I've heard Jags. I think I've heard Seahawks. I've heard Vikings. And I think that's all been reported by the Rossinis and the Field Yateses of the world. And so there's a big bidding war. Who wins the bidding war? I don't think that question has been answered yet, let alone, divulged to the press. So we'll have to still wait. But I think it was Rossini that said, that he doesn't want a dragged out process, that he's going to want to make his decision and make it sooner rather than later. So hopefully we'll find out about that soon. Here's where I'm at. So I'm going to be out of town this weekend. We're leaving tomorrow afternoon. So if I can do a live show tomorrow morning, that'll work. Otherwise, this will kind of be the Friday show. A lot of people will probably listen to this in the morning, or maybe they're catching it on their way home from work because it's about that time, about 5:30 in Central Time. But if that's the case, if I can go live, I will. If they sign somebody crazy, if something happens on Saturday, you're gonna have to wait till Monday for me to do it because I'll be out of town by then. But we'll catch up on everything on Monday, and then we'll kind of go back into a more normal cadence here. But these live shows have been very fun, so thank you so much for coming around and joining me for them. And yeah, I hope y'all have a great weekend. And honestly, I kind of hope I get to talk to you one more time because that means something really fun happened. Thank you to my #everydayers. After free agency is truly calmed down, I think there's still 2 or 3 more transactions the Vikings are going to make before they really chill out. We're going to go straight into draft mode. We're going to do mock drafts. We're going to do, player profiles and all into that. This remains a daily show throughout all of the offseason, even in the summer months when we do the Everyman series where we do backstories and all the new guys. So we get to really get to know Will Fries and Justin School and, Isaiah Rodgers and all these guys. We'll really get to know them. So thank you so much for hanging out. I will see you all at least next week, but maybe even sooner. And as always, Skull.